Good morning. You're going to find that the organization in this YouTube video is a bit different than usual. You'll find only audio by me, but you'll also find video by Ann Rothstein. At the end of the presentation, you'll be asked to view a video of Ann Gentile and then listen to a podcast about Richard Schmidt. There are links for you at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. Today I will be introducing myself to you, and by doing this you will begin to understand motor learning and you will be able to build a framework for exploring it. By weaving my personal experience with the conceptual framework of motor learning, I hope it will begin to become alive for you. You can see that on the timeline I graduated high school in 1972. In 1976, I was just about getting ready to graduate from college. In 2009, I was given the honor of being the recipient as the outstanding professor for the university. And then in 2016 is when we moved back into the building, SPX, after a major renovation to Yoshida Hall and Spartan Complex. Much needed. I went to Lehman College, which is part of the City University of New York. One of the things that attracted me to the CSU and San Jose State University specifically is its diversity, which is very similar to Lehman College. As well, many of our students at San Jose State University are first-generation students as students in the City University of New York, which I am one of those. Even though my brother went to college, my parents did not have any college, which makes us first-generation college students. When I got to Lehman College, I met several mentors in physical education who guided us through our program and beyond, and one of them was Dr. Ann Rothstein. I'd like for you to hear from her now.
Hello, my name is Ann Rothstein, and I am currently a professor at Lehman College in the Bronx. It's part of the City University of New York. And I've been there since 1965, and I'm still there. And I was fortunate in 1972 to have had the pleasure for 4 years of teaching Emily Burkhalter. She was pretty much in all the classes I taught, and to my greatest pleasure, she is actually in the same field that I was in. However, the field that we were in, or I was in at that time, was very much the beginnings of what we called motor learning. And now, over the years, motor learning has actually changed to a great extent. And Emily, because of her background and her innovative thinking, has changed along with it and become a major force in motor learning and looking at new concepts and new ways of measuring motor behavior and learning. I went to school with Patricia Del Rey, who actually was Emily's doctoral advisor, and Pat Del Rey and I were students of Ann Gentile. So that means that Ann Gentile is Emily's grandmother, and Pat Del Rey and I are actually her aunties or mothers in academia. Anyway, so when I started at Lehman College, there was very little in the way of funding or space to start a motor learning lab, as you know, in your program. So what I did was I decided that the field actually needed someone to translate what we knew from research in motor learning and behavior to practice. Because teachers, which is what we train, what we trained and what some of you are training for, and even if some of you are going into physical therapy, the research is really not very accessible to people that are practicing in different fields of physical education, physical therapy. So I felt it was important that researchers who were doing like experiments and finding out how feedback worked, how best to teach open and closed skills, how attention worked, why, for example, there was a time when people were asking, why women tended to not be as skillful at certain kinds of skills as men. And so all these like gender differences, age differences, different ways of practicing, these were all very important to people who were going out to teach. So what I did is I started a newsletter that was called Bridging the Gap, which was intended to bridge the gap between research and practice in physical education and sport. And it lasted for approximately maybe 8 to 10 years. And it was a free newsletter that my students used to help me collate. We used to print it at school in the print shop at Lehman College. And then I had students that would help to collate it. And if you know Emily, you know that she's sometimes very precise about how things are done. So I used to have to teach my students how to make sure that when they stapled the newsletter together, that the pages weren't all uneven and that they were actually very lined up, so it wouldn't look like they were just sloppily thrown together. And finally, most of the students learned what I meant. But anyway, that newsletter went out to a lot of programs in the United States, like mostly colleges of teacher education. But also there were many sport-focused countries overseas who had very big sports programs, and my newsletter would go to Russia, Germany, Scandinavian countries, England, to a lot of colleges and universities that would train people just for one sport. In 1976, you probably don't remember because you're too young, New York City went broke. And the colleges could no longer afford to let faculty like me do things that were using their resources without actually paying for them. So in order to be able to ask a fee for having a subscription, I created a journal called Motor Learning and Practice, which lasted for about 10 years. But what we would do is I would contact people or like researchers in physical education that were in certain areas of study, like you've heard about schema theory, you've heard about open and closed skills, or you will hear about attention, you'll hear about using feedback, you'll hear about various different theories and practices that could lead to differing levels of skill. So what I did is I contacted these researchers and I asked them if they would write an article which used their research to come up with some hints or suggestions for how teachers might implement the results of their research in practice to help improve the learning and performance of students in their physical education classes or on their sports teams. Many of the people that wrote the articles would always start by doing this is how I did the research, this is how, what the theory is, this is, what the statistical outcomes were of my research. And by the last paragraph, they would finally spend about one short paragraph saying, well, this is how you might apply the results of my findings in your classroom. So as a stickler for wanting the suggestions for practice to be uppermost, I would always tell them that they needed to change their article and actually start the article with the last paragraph. And it was always amazing to me how this changed their whole focus. Because what they would do is they would start by saying, this is how my research will affect your practice, and this is what you should do in the classroom. And then what they would do is they would continue to talk about practice, but they would bring in the research findings that actually related to the kinds of practice suggestions that they were making. So it made it much more interesting, I think, and in a way more palatable for a teacher or a pre-teaching student in an education program to really link what they were going to do in the classroom to what the researcher had found in their laboratory. This actually went on, as I said, for about 10 years, and we actually also published 2 monographs. One was called What's Going On in Gym, which was a compilation of doctoral research that came out of Teachers College, Columbia, where each doctoral student would develop a survey form to see how teachers were using feedback, how teachers were using questioning, how teachers were using like shaping or coaching or scaffolding behavior in the classroom. And the doctoral student would go and observe the teachers in the classroom, and then they would use the results to explain or reveal how teachers were using what were thought to be really important practices for motor learning in their classrooms to teach students motor skills. We published a volume, as I said. The other volume that we published was by a colleague of mine, Reese Faith Arnold, who was also a student of Ann Gentile's. And what she did was she took Ann Gentile's motor learning theory, and she actually was able to explain how the parts of Ann Gentile's theory related to motor behavior and teaching practice. So in any event, I felt, and I actually know that what I did in developing this emphasis on theory into practice really changed somewhat what the field was doing, because first there's SHAPE, the organization which used to be the American Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, used to have a column in one of its journals, I think it was in Joker, that was actually labeled Theory into Practice, and at one point I edited it, but then it was clear that more was needed. So I was on the first editorial board and in fact helped to shape the journal Strategies, which is now published by SHAPE, and actually focuses on theory into practice. So I think that is one of my legacies for physical education. It was the fact that people realized that in order to make the research that was being done valuable and not have it just be in journals that only other researchers would read, it was necessary for somebody to take responsibility for taking what we know from research and actually translating it into practice for physical educators on a regular basis. In reality, some of the motor learning textbooks that you've used or that have been written in the past try to do that, but books are static. Journals and articles, keep up with the times, so as new things are found, they can publish new findings for the way people learn motor skills and how best to help them do that. So I really thank Emily for letting me speak to you, and I wish you a very good semester, and hopefully you will appreciate the fact that what you are studying really does have a connection to how people learn motor skills, and if you go into teaching or physical therapy, you will be aware of the fact that what is published in the research can have broad implications for how you do your work. Thank you very much, and have a good semester.
So after I left Lehman College, my expectation was that I was going to be a teacher in the New York City schools. But unfortunately, because of the budget crisis, there were no teaching jobs available. Although for 1 year between Lehman College and the time I went to do my master's degree, I had 3 teaching jobs. One was in a Catholic school where I taught 1 day a week, all of the girls, physical education. And one was in a yeshiva, which is a Jewish day school, where I taught K through 8 physical education to boys and girls. And then in a drug program, I was hired to teach math because of the background that I had with math and also in teaching. But I only wanted to do that for a short time because driving around the city was not fun to do. So I decided to begin to apply to programs all over the country. And to my wonderful surprise, I was accepted into the University of Colorado in the motor learning program. And I wrote motor learning because of Ann Rothstein, because I had the exposure to motor learning. Remember that motor learning is a relatively new area. It was founded in around the 1960s or so, late 1960s probably. And there weren't many undergraduate programs that were offering motor learning courses. As Ann Rothstein was at Lehman College, I had the good fortune of having motor learning at the undergraduate level, and I loved the content. To my surprise and how wonderful, I found John Shea at the University of Colorado. He turned me on to what it meant to be a scholar and to love the work that you do. I finished my master's degree in 1 year, including a thesis, comprehensives, and orals. And I didn't know what I was going to do at the end of that year. I called my mother and I told her that I wanted to open a bike shop. I think if she could have crawled through the lines from New York to Colorado, she would have. And brought me home to New York so that I could begin my teaching career. In June, when I was about finishing my thesis, I received a call from Pat Del Rey, and she was a professor of mine from Queens College in 1976. Queens College is a sister college to Lehman College, and I took her for one of the very first American Women in Sport offerings. Pat Del Rey is known as one of the first people to offer a Woman in Sport course for academic credit. She went on to become a women's studies professor and still teaches women's studies today. I also finished my doctoral experience within 3 years, and at 26 years old, I was hired into a tenure-track position at New York University. I stayed at NYU for 10 years, but really wanted to leave New York and find a life that had much more quality, like I have in Santa Cruz, and also in an institution that had a large, at that time, human performance faculty. 27 years ago, I was hired at San Jose State University to begin my teaching career there. So you can see in this slide my legacy. Here's me and my mentors. My undergraduate mentor you got to know today a little bit, Ann Rothstein. John Shea worked with Richard Schmidt, one of the leading scholars, in motor learning, and Patricia Del Rey, who worked with Ann Gentile, and Ann Rothstein, who also worked with Ann Gentile. Rothstein mentioned in her video how she worked with Pat Del Rey as well. My legacy is good because of the legacy of these individuals. Make that something that you think about when you choose graduate work and when you choose the people who are your mentors. So I want you to link out to the video here and the podcast below and be ready Thursday to discuss the legacy of these individuals. Remember that this Thursday, February 1st, lecture is online and your labs are in class. So here are the early leaders in motor learning: Ann Gentile, Richard Schmidt. Please go out from the PowerPoint slide set to this link. Please go out to the podcast from this link. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday.